Righto, let's talk a little bit about surface mode and vase mode and how they work, and how you can use them to your advantage. In relation to the plane I'm currently building, my Ender 6 doesn't do surface mode um, because of the firmware that's on it, but I can still use it to get some good efficiency out of what I'm printing, and also to be able to create um, strength in parts. I can also use it to avoid stringing. What you find with vase mode is you don't get stringing, but you don't have to use vase mode to get rid of that stringing with lightweight PLA. And I'll show you why. Probably the easiest way to think about it is vase mode is like a slinky. There's just one continuous print that has no stop and no end. So there's no Z seam on it. Basically, the printer starts in a spot, and as it's printing the item, it slowly goes up, so that when it gets to where it started, it's actually at the height to start the next layer. And it basically does that all the way through. Now, that's great for a slinky or a vase, which is really nice and round, but how do we get some of that internal structure and things like that? Big shout out to my mate Lockey over in WA. Hope you're feeling better, mate. He was a little crook for a while there, but I believe he's back on deck. If you don't know Lockey, he's the guy who did the lightweight PLA Draco in a size that I believe is a couple of mil larger than the one that company did. Anyway, I'll leave that alone. So when we look at something like this shape here, you've got basically a rectangle with some internal structure. And the way that that's been done, so the internal structure when it's printed actually looks similar to this. Now you might say, well, how does vase mode do that? Because I can see that there are areas that when the print head would be running, that at some point it's going to have to lift off and move to the other location. It's quite simple. So it's not actually, even though these bits look solid, even though it looks like one piece, it's not. It's actually two. So when it's printed similar to this. So when we talk about that vase mode where we're doing that continual slinky, that's basically how it's done. This piece here and that bit coming down, the bit coming up, terrible drawing by the way, there are actually two lines that aren't connected, and we use that to our advantage, so that what we end up with is that nice structure in the middle. And even though in this print you can see, so here's where I started and where I stopped, and at that point, if I'm doing vase mode, it will be high enough to start the next layer. This bit here, in here, and this bit in here, they don't actually touch the outer surface. And there's a reason for that. That's what makes it one single straight continuous line. So another example would be if I was just basically to do a circle and I just wanted some structural integrity to it, I could do something like that. Once again, as you can see, it's a single line. And these bits here that are giving me my strength, they're two lines, but they're printed so close together that when they're printed, they come out as a single line. If you look at that piece at the top there, it looks solid. Now, here's the deal. To get it to work, and this is what Lockey showed me, the gap between these two lines that you want to come out as a solid needs to be 0.08. And where you've got one structure that meets another, so here we've got this bottom bit that comes up to meet this other bit, and if all four of these were going to meet in the middle, there needs to be a gap of 0.9. Now I know what you're thinking. Why is it that when I print this line, even though it's two lines, it becomes a single line at 0.08, and where I have structures that are meeting each other, it's 0.9 and they basically join together. I don't know. It's one of the amazing things about 3D printing. Anyway, so there's a basic overview of how it works. And you might think, well, how do I do that? Some of this is quite simple. And when you start playing around with it, you'll come up with ideas. So what I generally do is I don't start off with trying to create a surface, because that'd be quite hard, because straight away I'm talking about like if I'm in Fusion 360 creating a surface as opposed to creating a body. I don't try and create a surface because that would be really hard to do. I could create a body and then remove those other surfaces, but I would still have had to have gone through the process I'm just about to show you to get these internal structures. So basically what I do, I'll make it a space. Oh, that's rubbing off well. Yeah, anyway, second time's a charm. So what I'll do, I'll create, and I'll draw this in a kind of a three-dimensional view. I'll create a cylinder. So that's my cylinder. Messed that up a bit, didn't I? And then what I'll create, if I want to put, just like I did with this guy, if I want to put something running through the center of it, what I'll do is I will create another body. So there's one body. I'll create another body, and that runs obviously the full length of it because I want to cut the full length. I'll create a body and I will make it more than the length of that because I'm gonna split body it. So I create that body. The length is whatever, the height is whatever, but it's obviously relative to how far I want to cut into the object. But what I do is I make it that 0.08 thick. Okay? So then I move this piece up into this piece so the two intersect each other, and then I'll do a split body. And the cylinder is the body to split, and this is my splitting tool. So what I end up with in the end is I then have a cylinder, and it's a body that now has, and if I draw the internal of it, that now has basically that cut all the way through it. So when you then throw that into your slicer and you slice it, and then you just drag down through the layers, you'll be able to see that it actually comes in. And you've now got that structure. If I want to do what I did with the other one where I had one coming across, well, I'd basically do the same thing. Once again, I'd create another body, and it would be as long as it needs to be. And it would be that 0.08 thick. And then I would slide the body into this body, so it would come in here well, I want it to come all the way across over the top of that one, because what I want to end up with is basically that. So I would then slide this in, and then once again, I would do my split body. So this is my target, that's my tool. So what I then end up with is, coming in from this side, I would have that. And once again, the internal view would be like that. Now, just remember, what I need to do when I slide this body into that when I go to split it, I need to make sure that this doesn't go all the way through the body. Otherwise I'm going to split it in half and I'll have two. I want to leave it that 0.9 mil from the end of the other side, so that this in here has a 0.9 millimeter gap between this body and the outer of that body. If you play around with it, it becomes actually quite easy. You know, just start using your measuring tool and measure from, you know, a point on this to the other side of that. Eventually you'll sort it out. One thing I did find was that sometimes when you measure things, because you want this body to be extruding past this face, that the distance isn't actually relative to how far that line is from the outer circle. So on occasion, what I'll do, especially where I've got a line that isn't straight, is I will line up the edge of this with the edge of that. And then what I'll do is I'll do a move. So I'll then move this back this way, and using the indicator in the move tool, it'll tell me how far away I am from it. I could also just punch in 0.09 to move it that far away. So, you know, there's a couple of ways to do it. Anyway, have a bit of a play, have a bit of fun with it, and you'll find that you can actually create some really cool shapes. This is kind of the first time I did it. And I did a couple of things. So, you know, you can see that I've done that bit there with the two join. I've got a couple of little bits down the back here, which are going to help the motor mount. And there are a couple of spots where, and this is where you need to think ahead in your design. That's a big part about this, thinking ahead in your design. There are a couple of spots where internally, so this piece is printed like that. There were some components that I didn't want to start until after. So rather than having a square edge on the end of it, which wouldn't print well, I put it on an angle. So when we talk about, here's my cylinder and I'm printing it, I want to print it like that, and I want to have some support structure running down the inside of it like that, but I don't want it to touch the bottom, so it needs to start up here. If it starts there and it's just that flat straight line, well, that's just not going to print right, and it's just going to be really messy and ugly. So what I've done is, when I've created that splitting tool, the splitting tool actually has an angle on it, which is printable. So hence, when it prints, it does that. So I don't have this massive overhang, and it prints. It just starts printing nicely. It goes further out, further out, further out, further out, further out, and then away it goes. So you get a really nice clean print. With a lot of these prints, I didn't have to do a lot of cleanup, just because even though I didn't print it in vase mode, it did print in vase mode, technically, because it's a single line. The only difference is that I didn't have the advantage of vase mode, where it'll print and then just keep printing without that Z-hop. So when you look at these guys, there's a Z seam here somewhere from where it's hopped up. Actually, there's not in that one because that one didn't. There's not in that one because that one didn't either. Actually, no, it does. I just hit it really well. So it's on that inner structure there, so you can't actually see it. And what you'll probably find is with this guy, is it's hidden on the inside somewhere. Yeah, I think it's running down that internal part. Sorry, it has to have a Z seam because it's not vase mode. It's just that they're really well hidden. And that it's really good from a cleanup point of view. And a way to tell that you've got this right is that you're not getting a lot of stringing. If you're getting a lot of stringing, you haven't done it right. You should go back and look at your slicer, and your slicer will tell you what you're doing wrong. If you're seeing, an easy way to check is turn off vase mode or surface mode, and you'll see more than one Z seam spot. So one spot where it's doing where it's jumping around, and that might be because the way you've designed it isn't quite compliant with the way that needs to work. So what I mean is, it might get itself into a corner and it has no other option but to lift and move to another spot to start again. So keep that in mind as well. But you can tell straight away, because you'll get, especially with the lightweight PLA, you'll just start getting a little bit of that stringing back and forth from somewhere. I know I got a little bit of that with like my ailerons and stuff, but it was all internal. So to be honest, I really don't care. Worst case scenario, apart from wasting like $500 of material, it's actually add a little bit more rigidity to it because now I've got those strings going back and forth from side to side. I did have a cutaway piece that showed it better. Anyway, hope that helps, and yeah, good designing. Okay, so I've created myself a cylinder. Let's just pretend that's a fuselage. Let's just get rid of these sketches for the moment. So let's just pretend that's my fuselage, and I've got my cutting piece here. As we can see, with this cutting piece, it's very thin, so it's that 0.08 that I was talking about. And what I want to do is I want to basically put a platform through this structure. So what I do is I just line it up nicely, and I'm just going to move this guy. Bring him down a little bit. And what I want to do is, this is one way to do it, so I'm going to line it up as close as I can to the edge. Okay, so that's completed my move, and now what I need to do, I need to have a gap, and that gap needs to be that 0.9 that I was talking about. So let's do another move on the same object, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it that 0.9. So there's a couple ways I can do it. I can just drag it till it gets there, or I can just enter it in once I know which axis it's on. So there we go. Now I've got this bit of a gap here, and you can see that doesn't come through the other side, so that's pretty cool. And all I'm going to do now is I'm just going to do a split body. So this is my body to split, and what I normally do, I've seen some little weird issues sometimes where when I select something, it's selecting the face and not the actual body. So what I normally do is I expand my bodies, I work out which body it is, so it's body 2. So my splitting tool is body 2, so it's selected the whole body and not just the face, and then I just OK that. If I just hide this guy, you can see that I've now split that, and that's this guy here. So if I get rid of that little slither, you can now see that I've actually cut all the way across that. So if I just throw this out to print, this guy, okay. Okay, so when we look at our preview, I don't know if I put yeah, this one's got top layers, and we slide down through it, what we can see is that it's not touching this side, but when it prints that, it'll print close enough that those sides will actually be joined, and on this side we actually have, as you can see, we've got the gap. Righto, let's jump back here. Let's turn on my slicing object. So if I wanted to come up from the bottom, I can just use the exact same object. So if I select this guy, I could actually even just take a copy of him and just move him down a bit. And obviously I want to rotate him because it's on a different plane. Just going to leave him there for a sec. I'm just going to grab him from the top, make it a bit easier. So once again, I do pretty much exactly the same thing. So what I want is I need this guy to be that 0.9 away from the other guy. So if I line this up, so he's basically touching him. I don't know if I'm in the center of the object or not, doesn't really matter for this demonstration. It's pretty close. So if I line him up like that, so he's pretty much spot on, and then I do another move just to move at that 0.9. Yeah, it's zoomed in pretty close, so I'll just drop a 9 in there, and he's now that 0.9 away. And once again, I can do pretty much the exact same thing. Who are you? You're body 2, so I'm going to get rid of you. Yeah, cool. So once again, I'm just going to do split body. So body 3 is my body to split, and body 4 is my tool. And we'll basically see the exact same thing happen again. Yeah, look at that little slither. And as you can see, there's that 0.09, sorry, the 0.9 I keep talking about. So let's save this guy out. Right, so once again, we've got the gap down the bottom, but it doesn't actually touch here. It's close, but not quite. And when we look at it, and we just check how it's going to print that, you'll notice that it conforms with what we need for vase mode, because it's just one single continuous line throughout the whole of the layer, and therefore you can print in vase mode or surface mode. And one of the benefits of that is that you won't have that Z-seam. You also won't get stringing, so see that started from the same place it left off. And if I go, obviously, if I go up or down a couple of layers, doesn't make any difference, because it's pretty much just it's the same object shape all the way up. So yeah, if it does it on one layer, it's going to do it on all of them. Okay, so I'm going to try slicing something which doesn't have a uniform shape like the last one, because that had a uniform shape, it was really easy to do. You know, it was all perfectly symmetrical, so you know, I could just jam the wedge in there like I did and cut it, and I know that it's aligned front to rear of the object, so that's not a problem. So let's turn these sketches back on, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to loft that so that we have a really unusual looking shape, which, you know, using a rectangular piece is obviously going to cut all the way through it if I try and put that through. And what I mean by that is if I grab this guy and I put him into the object, he is going to come out in some places, but not others, so the distance is unequal. So what I want to do is I want to extend that object for starters so that it goes the full length of this object. So let's just pull him out. Just cancel that. I'm going to zoom in on him, and I'm going to see if I can extrude this edge. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Yep, cool, he's happy for me to do that. Extrude can really play up sometimes. Okay, so I'm going to go to the top, and I'm just going to be carried away there, didn't I? And I'm just going to let go all the way through. That needs to be widened as well. So I'm going to do basically the same thing, but on this edge if it lets me as well. Yeah, cool. So I'm going to pull that out a bit. I always end up doing more than I think I need because it just makes it easier. Means I don't have to do it twice. Righto, so we've got this really big cutting surface now. So let's just go back to that top view again. And what I want to do is I want to move this object into that object like I'm going to cut it. But as you can see, just because it isn't a uniform shape, it's just not going to work. So what I need to do, let's just jump around to the front. Might just bring that up a little bit just so it's... Let's have a look at that. How's that look? Yeah, it's going to be more uniform in there. So the question is, how can we get this to work? Well, I think it's quite easy. We'll give it a crack. So what I'm going to do is, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a split body.
So the body to split is actually my plane this time around. So body 2, and my splitting tool is going to be body 6. Okay, so when I do that, I'm going to end up with a couple of pieces. So now I've got the outside piece, this piece, and there's an inside piece that you can't see at the moment. So if we get rid of that, see this piece here? So let's hide this guy because I don't need him anymore. So I've got that guy and I want this guy. And as you can see, that line runs perfectly down the edge there. So what I want to do, I'm going to get rid of this guy as well. So I don't need him at the moment. So I've got this guy and that guy. Get rid of that guy. I just want to clean it up a bit so we know exactly what we've got and what we don't. Alright, cool. So I'm going to come to the front and I am going to just hide this object for a second. And what I want to do is exactly the same as what I've been doing with everything else. Look at that, it's even giving me a nice little chamfer on the edge. So I'm going to select this guy to move him, and I'm going to move him by 0.9. Okay, so I've moved him 0.9 to the right. So when I turn my other body on, he is no longer protruding out the left-hand side. But he is the right. Now, one other thing that I'm going to do, just to make sure that this works correctly, is I am going to see if I can extrude this edge, because I want to make sure that it extends past. Yeah, you got a little bit of angle on there, but yeah, that'll work. It's both sides. Yeah, you can see over here, it's not really poking out. It's pretty close. I'm just going to make that a new body for a second. Yeah, there you go. Now that I've done that, it's happier. So let's just get rid of this guy for a sec. And I want to do the same here. I just want to extrude this edge, which is extruding the way it was cut along that face. That's why it doesn't look parallel, but yeah. So I'm going to join that. I'm just going to... So I didn't actually join this one, but I will now. So I'm just going to do a combine between this guy and that guy. So they're cool. So now when I look at it, it's sticking out one end, one side, and the other end. So if I come and do a split body on this, I'm basically going to end up with the exact same scenario as before, even though it's not a straight line, because I've made the line match what the actual object was. So let's do our split body. So our body to split is 6, and our splitting tool will be 2. Hit OK to that. And who is who in the zoo? That's cool. So we've now got that slice all the way through it. So another way you can actually look at this sort of stuff is if you come down to your select section analysis and you click on a face, and then you can drag the arrow through the body, and it'll actually show you the internal structure. So as you can see, it maintains that distance from here to there. If you've ever done an analysis and clicked off and gone, hold on a second, I've just lost all my drawing and stuff because I left the cursor partway through, you can actually just come up to the analysis section and you can turn that analysis off. So I now get to see everything that was going on. So I'll do the same with this one. I will just throw it in the slicer. So as you can see, it's a fairly simple task to do. It does require, though, often that you think ahead a bit. And I prefer this method to using a surface as opposed to a body, because I can go back and fix mistakes in this quite easy. If I'm going to try and create a surface in a similar fashion, I'm going to have to draw those lines out. I'm going to need to make sure that the gaps are right, and the issue becomes that all of a sudden I'm concentrating more on getting that internal structure right as opposed to the outer shape that I'm trying to create, because I need to think about everything well in advance as opposed to just thinking about it beforehand. You can normally just make a general shape like I did, and once you're happy with your shape, you can then just do your cuts in that shape, and then you end up with something like this guy. So once again, if we just drag down through that, we can see that he is not touching on this side. There's a Z-seam there. And we can see on the other side that it's open. So once again, if we just run our print layer preview, it'll just run around and have a bit of a look. And yeah, as you can see, it's good to go. So I've just thrown the object back into Cure and resliced it without top or bottom layers. One distinct difference that you'll notice is that I no longer have that second wall, which you wouldn't have if you're doing vase mode. And as you can see, if we just do our print preview, it's really straightforward. I think one thing worth mentioning is that there isn't a lot of structural support in this. There is a bit across that section where there's the bit that travels all the way across, and it'll be really strong through there, but it won't be strong in other areas. So this is kind of where you need to think, well, what can I do to make it more structurally sound using this type of method? So there's a few things that can be done. Let's just stop that. And if we just scroll up through that, as you can see, it's got a nice uniform distance, and at no point does it actually touch. So I'll throw that on the printer and I'll print that out as well, and I'll show you what that looks like afterwards. Okay, I'm just going to roll back to the other object that we created. And what I want to do is I want to create something that's a little bit more structural. Like at the moment, this isn't too bad. It creates some really nice solid areas to the base here, but up the top it's still very soft, remembering that this is thin wall print. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by creating a box, and I want it on this plane, and I want it to basically fit inside the existing. Got a bit of snap to going on there. I want to create a new body because I don't want to cut it yet. And I want that to run. I'm going to make it full length. Okay, so I have my new body, and I just want to cancel that for a sec. So I've got my new body, and basically what I want to do is I want to create an area whereby this body provides an internal compartment, but I want to do it the same method that I did those other things. So it sounds like it could be quite tricky, but what we'll do is we'll just center it up, and then we will take care of the harder bit, which is just going to be aligning it so that we've got that 0.9mm gap to everything. And then I'm basically going to add one of these wedges on top of it so that it slices through the top of the structure. You'll see what I mean in a minute. It sounds kind of complex. You can make it harder than it needs to be. I'm going to try to make it fairly simple, but we'll see how we go. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I just want to pull that body all the way through. So I'm just going to move it forward a bit because it's not quite protruding all the way through. And that will probably make it a bit easier to see what's going on. I just want 1 mil. I just want it to be coming through. Oh, I hate that. Righto, so let's just get a front-on view. So what I want to do is I want to align. So let's do another move. Body to move is this guy. I want to align him at the top corners. And that was a massive fail. Scroll around a bit. So I'm just going to line up one side and then I'm going to see what it's like on the other, because from what I can tell this will all make sense in a minute. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty good. And if I come look at the other side, ooh, I'm out just a little bit. So what I want to do, so I'm going to extrude this side rather than move it, because as soon as I start moving it, I'm going to be pushing and pulling, you know, I'll mess up the other side, which is pretty close. So if I just do an extrude on this side and bring it out to the line, and I want to go a new body so that I'm not, what's that distance? That's 0.5. Let's go a 0.55. Oh, it's close. 6, 7. Let's go 6, 5. Yep, that looks pretty good. Okay, so that's a new body. I'll need to join the two bodies at some point, but that's looking pretty good. If I just jump back over to the other side, yeah, yeah, that one's looking pretty good. I don't think I'm going to get it much better than that, eyeballing it. Okay, so the top two sides are aligned fairly well, so I'm happy with that. And I just need to join these other components. So if I just hide this guy, and I just want to combine this guy and this guy, good to go. There are no other objects around that I'm cutting into or anything crazy. Alright, I'm going to turn that body back on. Now, what I want to do is I want to move this box down that 0.9. So that gives me the 0.9 gap at the top. It may not be perfectly 0.9, but it will be close enough. Let's probably go a mil. So that's 0.2, that's 2, sorry, so I want to go 0.9. So that's now 0.9. And if I have a look, I can see that there is a gap there. So that's cool. But now, what I now need to do is I now need to get this within 0.9 of the line below it. So I'm going to do basically the same thing. I'm going to extrude the bottom of that until it is literally touching that other body. Is this guy? Yeah, it's what I was hoping for. So there's the one that I cut it with earlier. So what I want to do is I want to hide that guy. So I want to extrude it down to that other line. So let's go extrude this guy. Now what I can do is I can extrude it to the line, and then if I minus 0.9 off that, so that'd be 6.8. So now I have my 0.9 gap. Okay, join. So I bring my other body back in. As you can see, those gaps all look roughly about the same. They're all around about that 0.9. Get rid of that other body so we can't see it anymore. And what that should do is when I print it, they will actually join together. I'll show you those other pieces if I haven't already. Okay, so now the only issue I have at the moment is that this is just a block in the middle of nowhere. If I try and print that at the moment, even if I hollowed it out, I'm just going to create a whole stack of stringing. So there's a couple of things I want to do. The first is I'm going to turn this into a surface. And then I'm going to thicken it so it becomes a body. You'll see why I'm doing that in a second. The other thing I need to do is I want to grab body 4 and I'm going to move body 4. Oh, hates me. I want to move body 4. I kind of align it with this square, and I'm basically going to join the two up. Righto, that looks pretty good. So I want to actually I'm not going to join them yet because it's a little bit early. I should probably look to also move this guy up a bit. It's 0.5. I go 6. So I'm embedded 0.4 in. Righto. So here we go. Actually, I'll reduce that 0.4 later because it needs to be 0.08, but we'll get to that. You're right, I'll just do it now. So I want this body to be approximately, so I want this body to be 0.08 inside that body. Okay, so what I want to do is I now want to turn this into a surface. So I'm just going to delete a couple of those, and then what I want to do is I want to thicken it. But I want to thicken it in an internal direction. Okay, cool. So, and I want that to be 0.08. And you'll find out why in a second. It's going to be quite important, because keeping in line with what we're trying to do by creating those 0.08 cuts through the object, that's where it becomes very important. And by doing that, it means that we will, I know that was saying 0.08, but I'm just making sure. Yeah, doing that means that we'll end up with those really thin cuts, and when we slice it, you'll see that I've got that single track which is suitable for vase mode again. How far through is this sticking? So that looks good, that looks good. So that's all aligned quite well. So what I want to do now is I want to come back to solids, and I want to combine this guy, that guy, that guy, and this guy. Okay, so that's now body 4. Must be body there. Let's just get rid of body 1 because we don't need that anymore. Where's this guy? Body 3. Let's get rid of body 3. So where is, there we go, there's my body 5. So you can see what's going to happen now. So all of a sudden what we have is the print will start in this corner, it'll come out to this line, it'll start moving up this way, and then it's going to follow this track around. And then it's going to come back out, come around, do this guy, and back to the beginning. So we'll end up with that vase mode type effect. So it'll get rid of any stringing. And this is obviously a little bit easier than that other object we were looking at, because it is cylindrical and there's no deviation there to shape. It makes it a lot easier. There are other ways of doing it where you can do something similar to what I did before. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to do a split body. My body to split is body 5. My splitting tool is body 4. Okay, so what we end up with, which one's body, which one are you now? So you're body 15, so let's hide that. So that was the overlap, that's the cutting piece. So if we come back to body 15 and we do a section analysis of this plane, and we draw back, you can see that's cut all the way through. So if we now cancel our section analysis, and if we jump over to preview, so I've removed tops and bottoms, you can see yeah, it looks like one of the parts hasn't done properly. So it looks like what's happened is this is actually touching the outer wall. Okay, so that's what's happened there. It's touching the outer wall in both locations, and therefore when it comes along it's drawing down. So my gap isn't big enough there. So what I'll do is I will go in and I'll redo that. Let's just have a quick look and see what the distance is here. So let's just measure from there, to this line, and it'll give us closest distance. So the distance is 0.6. So there's the issue. It's too close. You need to move it away. Just a small amount and that'll be enough. So the easiest way to do that is probably going to be, let's just roll back pre-split body. Where is this body 4? So what I want to do is I want to move away slightly. So I'm going to move the sides. I'm going to extrude 0.3. This might seem a bit of an antiquated way to do it, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to extrude on one side and then I'm going to cut it off the other. So if we go minus 0.3, distance minus 0.3, and I cut back into that surface, objects to cut, so it should be cutting body 4, yep, cool, okay. And then if I do the same thing on this side, so we want to go minus 0.3, and that cuts into the face. And that looks good. So let's just get rid of everything after this point. We'll bring body 5 back in. Let's just measure this again. Measure from this point to here. So it now says the distance is 1.3. Now what we need to remember is that that's actually not a straight line. So if I reset that and I go from this line to this line, it's probably more representative. And there you go, 0.869 is the shortest distance. So let's try that and see how that goes. So once again, split body. Body to split is 5. My splitting tool is 4. Okay, so body 16 is our new body. Let's have a real quick look at the section analysis. Looks alright. Okay, so let's do the same again. Let's 3D print this guy. Let's have a look. This looks better. We seem to be back to that one single, I can see it right over in the corner there, one single Z-seam, which means that it's not lifting at any point. So let's have a look and see what it does this time. Right, so that's what we want. That's exactly what we're looking for. So I'll print that out and show you the end result. As you saw, I just had to adjust it a little bit because my distances weren't quite right because I kind of eyeballed it a little bit. But, you know, as you saw, it was really easy just to rescale what I was cutting with. And now I have, that's going to be a very solid piece, plus I'm going to have that solid hollow bit up the center where, you know, I can put battery or electronics or whatever I want to put on there. It's worth noting that this is thin wall print, but when you look at these internal components where it's 2 lines, it's not going to be 0.4, it's printing 2 lines, therefore it's going to be around about 0.8. And that's so these parts here, there's 2 lines, 2 lines, 2 lines, 2 lines. These all have 2 lines, whereas this outer bit is a single line, so it'll be, you know, that 0.4 that you're looking for. It will make it slightly heavier, but if you're using lightweight PLA, it's not such a big thing. But, you know, you're creating structure, you're creating something that's nice and solid, and that's, you know, that's the trade-off.
Righto, so here's the results from the prints that I did. As you can see, they came out pretty good. Remember, it's thin wall, so yeah. So what you'll notice is that it's quite strong, you know, where I've put those parts. It's really good. You need to remember though that, you know, it is a thin wall, so where there isn't that sort of support, it is still kind of flexible. You know, that joined really well. You know, I can't kind of pull that away or anything. So they're joined nice and tight. So that's good. Same with this guy, the weird shape one. I printed about half of it. You know, that's not coming away from there in a hurry. It's bonded through, and when you look at it close up, you can see there's actually a seam. So that's the side that we cut in and was open, and on the other side, there's just a seam where it's joined up. So the other one, this guy's come out really good. So he's actually a lot stronger around those bits. Obviously, he's still a bit weaker around here. And it kind of becomes one of those things. Top and bottom layers can add a lot to that. You know, when you look at this guy down the bottom, you know, he's really solid down the bottom because he's got that back bit holding it all nicely together. If you were to do, say, a bulkhead on that out of PLA, especially if you're joining two bits together, that'd work out really nicely as well because you would have some support around that edge. So it wouldn't just be open and be flexible like that. It'd have a little bit more support. But yeah, this internal structure is like really good. You know, all that's really well joined together. You know, once again, there's that seam. And same on the other side. Oop, there's the bottom one. That's where it's actually cut up into it. Yeah, there's the other side. There's another bit. There's another bit that actually cuts into it. And there's the other seam where it's joined. So, you know, you don't actually join it. You have, you know, that gap in relation to where one component's meeting another. You want a 0.9 gap to create the vase type effect where it goes up and comes back. You need to cut that 0.08 into the object, and that'll do that for you. So yeah, I hope that helps, and yeah, make something really cool.
So I'm going to show you another method of doing basically the same thing, but this time we're not going to have that double thickness inner shell that we did before. Any surface that goes from the outer shell to the inner shell will be that double thickness, but the inner shell itself will be that 0.4. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a cube inside the cylinder. I'm then going to extrude it so that it's, you know, larger than the cylinder, so it goes all the way from the front to the rear, and then I'm going to cut that out. So I'm just going to basically use the split body function so that I cut the cube out of the cylinder. Now if you were to print that as it was, you would have a whole stack of string as it passes between that inner and outer shell. What I'm going to do next is I'm basically doing the same as what we did before. I have a 0.08 body, which I'm going to cut into the cylinder. 3 of those cuts will be within the 0.9. One of the cuts will go all the way through, and what that allows it to do is that will allow it to go inside and draw that inner square. So if you just hang on a sec and wait for the cuts to be done and we go to the slicer, you'll see exactly what I mean. So I've done those first 2 cuts, and they are that 0.9 distance to the inner square. So this top one here, once again I'm lining it up, and we're going to do 0.9. So we'll now move it back that 0.9. Here we go. There's your 0.9. And we'll then take a copy of that, and we will then make it cut all the way through the bottom surface. Okay, so let's just cut the top and bottom ones, and we're pretty much good to go. So now that we drop it in the slicer, you can see that it conforms to that vase mode requirement where it is basically a single line. But what we've done is we've reduced the amount of material that's required for that inner cube. That inner cube is now just a single line, whereas before it was a double line. So obviously that has its advantages if you ensure that the cube is large enough that the lines which go from the inner to the outer is less than what would be required to the cube, then obviously you've reduced the amount of material that's needed and therefore the weight. So if you've made it this far, you've done really well. It's like an hour's worth of material. I hope this will really help you with some of the designs that you do. I'm sure there's much more stuff that can be done. I by no means call myself a Fusion 360 expert or 3D printing or anything, but it should really kind of help you to get some ideas about what is possible, and you can take it from there. So if you find another method which is really cool, just drop something in the comments, or even if you drop a YouTube in the comment, that'd be really cool, just so we can see, because quite often it's a lot easier to visualize stuff as opposed to it being described. Anyway, happy designing, and thanks for getting this far.